Hello everyone. Welcome to Tale of Math episode 3. I am the host for today's episode organized by Team Mathfreaks. Myself, Dr. Vikas Dongre. I am head of the department in electronics at Government Polytechnic Washim, Maharashtra. I have published 8 research papers and written 2 books. I am also a YouTuber and I am working for the last 29 years. Today we have with us a very special person, Dr. Amitabha Tripathi. He is a professor of mathematics in a prestigious Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, which is one of the eminent institutions in India as well as in the world. And he is also the ex-coordinator of IMO. Today he will be answering the questions that you have asked him. So, hello Dr. Tripathi. Welcome to Tale of Math episode 3 on behalf of the team Mathfreaks. So, sir, please introduce yourself to our students.
Good morning, students, friends. This is what do I say about myself? All right. Let me begin from, let's say, a bit of my school. I went to 6 or 7 different schools all over the country. My father was in a transferable job, in a government job, central government job. And so this took me to different parts of India. It was difficult because you had to adjust to different languages, cultures, different modes of education, and so on. And so that was a challenge that I had to face. But in hindsight, now that I look back at it, I think it gave me a very good foundation to learning and to adjusting and to looking at different cultures the correct way. So for instance, I have spent my initial years, my starting years in the north in Chandigarh. Then my father moved to the west in Vadodara as it's called now, for 1 year. Following that, I spent 5 years in Madras, it's now called Chennai, in what has to be the best school that I attended. It was a superb school in more ways than one. And then my father got transferred to the central part of India. I studied in a school in Bhopal. And then I finished my education in a small town school near Patna. It's called Danapur. It's a cantonment area. The Bihar Regimental Center is situated there. And pretty much the only school that exists there is the Kendriya Vidyalaya. So I finished my education in 1977. I was the last batch of what you might call the 8+3. I'm making it up. Our board was the Central Board of Secondary Education, the CBSE, and the syllabus for the exam was 3 years, 9th and 10th and 11th. So whatever you studied in all 3 years combined was what was asked at the end of the 11th class in your board exams. We had 2 papers in all subjects, plus a practical if you did science. So there's a lot of pressure on us to perform because whatever you did in over 3 years was asked on 1 day or 2 days, let's say. And at our times, the opportunities were very few and far between. So so you really had to do very well at the board exam to then progress. And there weren't so many other opportunities beyond doing well in board exams. There were some competitive exams. If you wanted to be an engineer or a doctor, then there were entrance exams. For example, there was the IIT JEE. The IIT JEE started perhaps around 60 or 61, I don't exactly know. So a little bit before my time. And of course, medical college exams. But aside from this, there were no real competitive exams except perhaps Merchant Navy, I can recall. But most admissions were based on your marks in the board. And if you're not particularly interested in the technical branches like engineering or medicine, then everything rested on your performance in the board. So for me, for instance, it rested on the performance in the board. And unluckily for me, my last 2 years were spent in a school which is not one of the better schools that I studied in. But your foundation is laid in the middle years, I believe. They're not laid in class, 9, 10, or 11. It's what you learn in the middle school. And in this respect, I was very fortunate to go to the school I went to, which was Don Bosco Matriculation School. It was, in more respects than one, the best school that there existed during my time in Madras, in Chennai. I don't know how well it's doing now, but we had some very illustrious people during my time who went on to do very well, both academically and in cultural fields and in sports. To take a few names of my seniors and my juniors that some of you may have heard of, three tennis-playing brothers who were very famous but much senior to me, and therefore perhaps not known to your generation, were the Amrit Raj brothers.
Yes.
They were very prominent tennis players.
Yes. Vijay.
Anand was the oldest, and then Vijay,
Yes.
and the youngest was Ashok. And the older two brothers distinguished themselves in the international field. Anand played doubles with Vijay, and Vijay played very good singles as well. Reached the quarterfinals at the Wimbledon and so on. Ashok, who was the youngest, was national junior champion when I was in school. He was probably 6 or 7 years older than me. So I caught Ashok at the fag end of his career, and Vijay had just finished school. So Ashok then did not do very much in the tennis field beyond being a junior national champion, and then made his mark in Hollywood later years. I had never known either of the brothers because they were way too senior for me to know. Equally junior, about 7 or 8 years junior, was a chess player called Vishwanathan Anand. He's still active chess player, 5-time world champion and so on, and perhaps he does not need any introduction. I did not encounter him because he was probably 1 or 2 years old when I left school. He's a little bit younger. But that is another very illustrious name from this fantastic school which gave fantastic education in terms of and all-round development. So we habitually produce several top rankers in the state matriculation. After I finished school, this is a period of turmoil in India when I finished school from Kanpur in Patna. This is the height of emergency that was imposed by the then Prime Minister of India, Ms. Indira Gandhi. And there was a change in political scenario. And we felt that with the Jayaprakash Narayan movement and so on and so forth happening in Bihar, we were not very sure how education would be in Bihar. And my mother, who studied in the University of Delhi herself, she did a bachelor's and a master's from Hindu College, Delhi University. She was very keen that I come to Delhi and try to get admission in one of the better colleges in Delhi University. So she did try to persuade me, as did so many of my relatives, to study engineering, because the only subject that I was fairly good at, was mathematics. I was very average in the other subjects, maybe slightly better than average, but really nothing to speak of. Maybe my physics was somewhat all right, but I was just basically an average student. So anyway, so the summer of 1977, the year I finished school, brought me to Delhi. My mother had a brother and a sister living in Delhi in those days. And so we came to spend the summer there, but really her reason was to stay on till the end of summer so that the results would be announced and perhaps I could seek admission in the University of Delhi. Luckily, I did well enough in the board exam to get admission in the 5 best colleges of the University of Delhi at my time. In those days, admission depended purely on the basis of what you got in your board exams. In fact, it's still the case for the most part. So I picked the 5 best colleges which were open to me. Of course, the girls' colleges also were very good in those days. The Lady Shri Ram College at Miranda House, but obviously that was not open to me. So if you look at the other colleges, the male colleges, then I would say that the 5 best colleges at that time were St. Stephen's, Hindu, Hansraj, Ramjas and Kirodimal. And since I wanted to do mathematics, I chose to fill only for mathematics honors at these 5 colleges. And luckily for me, my marks were good enough that I managed to get through all of them. In St. Stephen's, then as now, there was an interview. This is quite competitive because they had a cut-off. They still have the same system. And they called 5 times as many candidates as there are seats. So there were 50 seats at my time. And so they had 250 people interviewing. There were a select few who were directly admitted because of exceptional merit. Maybe they were recipients of what is called the Science Talent Search. It now comes under a slightly different name, NTS, National Talent Search or something. Then it was called Science Talent Search. And also those who were in the top 10 positions of any board in the country, any board, 10 positions. So that, of course, is highly competitive and very difficult to get. There were a few of my classmates who managed that and they had direct admission. But some of us who were not so good, like me, had just about enough marks to make it to the interview, had to face the interview. And luckily for me, I managed to do well enough in the interview to be selected to go to St. Stephen's. And much against my wishes, I wanted to join Hindu College because my mother studied there. And also because I had this impression that people who went to Stephen's were little snobbish and little snooty. And I did not want to have that tag with me. And so I actually preferred to go to Hindu College. But after I got into St. Stephen's, my mother said that you would be wiser to join St. Stephen's rather than Hindu. And it's a choice you will not regret, regardless of the tags that may occur. And I, of course, listened to what my mother said, and I joined St. Stephen's. And I can say in retrospect, it was the wisest decision I ever made in my life, because those 3 years at St. Stephen's were some of my best years in more ways than one. And it was very challenging time. It was very interesting time because some of the brightest minds, I can say, were there. Very competitive environment in some sense for those who wanted to be academically challenged. But also it gave you the leverage to learn many other things and interact with people from all over the country. And there were people who were not necessarily academically very talented or even interested, but they went on to other fields and did very well. One of the reasons we did very well was because academically was because our intake was very limited and you kind of selected very carefully, not based only on the board marks. You selected very carefully. So it was no surprise that we did very well academically. Typically, maybe 3, 4, even 5 positions out of the top 10 in the University of Delhi would be people from my college in those fields that we had. So if you did fairly well within your class, you did fairly well within the university. And Delhi University then was a very strong university. It still is. And we who finished 40 plus years back don't think of St. Stephen's as being the same St. Stephen's we went to. This is the standard thing that we think of. And, but still, whatever it is, it still ranks amongst the best in any ranking that holds. So Stephanians at my time, by and large, were known to go into the public service, into the administrative service. But we also made a mark in many other fields. Lots of very good sportsmen at my time. We always finished at the top in the inter-college sports meets. That was mostly because, again, there was a sports quota and sportsmen were selected on the basis of that quota. They did not necessarily have very academic credentials. So, for instance, one of my batchmates was not particularly bright as an academician, but he was the captain of the Indian schoolboys cricket team. And on the prowess of his cricket, he was admitted to St. Stephen's. And he then went on to represent India in international cricket, played some test match cricket and ODIs, and he was a member of the 1983 World Cup team that won the World Cup, Kirti Azad. He then went on to become a politician. And similarly, there were other people who did very well. One of the cricketers I played some cricket in school, and I did try out for the cricket team, but that was not, I was not good enough to make it. And I realized very quickly that this is not my calling. I had played some reasonable cricket, some schoolboys cricket, represented the certain region and so on. But this level was different. This is a higher level, and I would have had to struggle a lot to just make it to the college team, let alone go beyond that. And this is different level. So one of the first persons I played cricket with, I remember, and I'm in touch with him, was a person who then went on to open India's test batting with Sunil Gavaskar for several years. Arun Lal, he became a commentator, and very fine gentleman. I'm in touch with him. Few years my senior. So we had some very good cricketers. And if you wanted to play any sport, it was not just cricket. We had the person who finished runners-up in the nationals in table tennis. Sanjay Kathuria was a couple of years my senior. One of my wingmates, my batchmate, was the national squash champion. So we picked the best, and they got in through academic, not necessarily through academic merit, through the sports quota. Similarly, we had a lot of people who went on to have a very distinguished career in administration. There's no dearth of people who went into the administrative service and did very well, and in politics. So this is so large a number that I can't even begin to start, so I will not start. There are so many names that people would have heard of, students would have heard of from my time, who were very distinguished. One of the persons I remember very well during my hostel days was a historian of some repute now called Ramchandra Guha. He was 3 years my senior. He also played cricket, and I knew him reasonably well. Shashi Tharoor had just finished from St. Stephen's when I joined. He was 5 years my senior. There is just so many names that I cannot even begin to address it. Some very prominent ministers in the current government, in the previous government, were people who were my time at St. Stephen's. From St. Stephen's, I went on to IIT Kanpur, which at that time, when I graduated in 1980, Kanpur was by far the best IIT for sciences, for physics, chemistry, and mathematics. So I chose Kanpur over Delhi and chose to study at IIT Kanpur. I did my master's from there, 2 years, and it was a very enriching experience for me. The teachers were extremely good, they were very dedicated, and the difference between the teaching was fairly obvious because I was taught by faculty members who actually did research. The teachers at St. Stephen's did not do any research. They taught. They taught very well, but they only taught. So I didn't get that extra perspective in mathematics from them. And whatever one learned was outside of the class was through peers who were excellent, who was very, very good. And the library that St. Stephen's had, it was outstanding. The set of books that we would have 10 copies of every nice book that anybody would think of. There was no shortage of budgets as far as academics was concerned. So those who were interested could go to the library and study there. And that was very enriching for me. And of course, I had the very good fortune of mixing and mingling with classmates and seniors who were incredibly talented and incredibly bright. Not all of them were interested in mathematics, of course. I was one of the few who was interested in maybe some 3 or 4 others per batch. So anyway, so I went to IIT Kanpur because that is what I'd heard was the best place to go to, and I didn't regret going there. It was a fantastic 2 years. It was an eye-opener to me that there were a set of people who taught well, worked hard for teaching, and also did very good research. And so it was enriching from that perspective. It also gave me other ways to process my energies For example, I was not very successful as a sportsman in St. Stephen's because the level was just too high. But at IIT Kanpur or at any IIT, the level was not nearly so high, and I was able to participate more in my sporting activities. I played cricket, I played table tennis, and I played carom for my hostel team, but none at the institute level. So I made some progress in my sports activities, and I did many other things, including I was a middle distance runner, and I became one of the better runners of Kanpur, and so on. Anyway, so after my 2 years at Kanpur, I decided to go to the US to do my PhD. I happened to do fairly well, relatively speaking, at Kanpur. I finished first in my batch. And in those days, they were not that not that many people went abroad. And typically, the only people who chose to go abroad were the people who did well, either finished first or second. Nowadays, that is not the trend. Nowadays, people who don't do so well also try to go abroad, and there are a lot more opportunities. At my time, the opportunities were very few. So unless you did very well, you didn't have a chance of going abroad. Anyway, so I chose to go abroad to do my PhD. I had already decided that I wanted to do number theory. This came to me about 2 or 3 years before. By the time I turned 17, and I was finishing my bachelor's, I decided that I wanted to do number theory. And there was exactly one number theorist in all 5 IITs combined, and he happened to be in IIT Kanpur, which is also the reason I chose Kanpur. So Professor Mohanty was my supervisor. He is no more. He passed away the day soon after he retired in 1997. So Professor Mohanty was my philosopher and guide. I don't know if he was my friend, but he was a friendly person, and he was an excellent teacher and an excellent researcher. He had gone to the University of California at Los Angeles to do his PhD many years back in number theory, and he came back and he worked in 3 different fields. He worked in number theory and algebra and graph theory. And he had a very holistic approach to learning mathematics. It was not restricted to just one branch. And that's one thing I learned from him, and I tried to follow at least that aspect of it in his footsteps. So after spending 2 years there, I went to the US, and US is very different. I was 20 years old when I went to the US just after having finished my master's. I was young. I was very interested in doing mathematics. I had no other interest in life really. And the university I went to was good without being one of the best. I went to the State University of New York. And one of the reasons I chose to go there was because there were several number theorists, and I felt that there would be several choices to make. And having gone there, I narrowed my search down to 2 people. And for one reason or the other, which I won't go into just now, I picked the person I did pick. He was young. He was 39 at that time. He was a full professor. He was the youngest full professor at the age of 35. Young even by the US standards. Not possible pretty much in India, but even by US standards, 35 is young. He was 39, and there was one PhD student. He had already graduated before me. I was the second PhD student. So I think he was interested in having a PhD student. He himself had finished his undergraduate when he was 21 and got a chance to work with one of the leading number theorists of the century called Harold Davenport. This is not a name that students would have heard of, but if you go to college mathematics or read any number theory whatsoever or Google, you will find Davenport all over the place. Harold Davenport was a legend. He was one of the great 20th century mathematicians. And Davenport went to Trinity College, Cambridge, the same place that Srinivasa Ramanujan went to. And Harold Davenport was a student of John Edensor Littlewood, who along with Hardy mentored Ramanujan. So Davenport was a student of Littlewood, and Littlewood actually passed away later. He died at 91 in 1977, much later than did Davenport. So I had many conversations with my supervisor asking him about Davenport and about Littlewood, he had seen. Littlewood was an old man when my supervisor joined the department, but he would come to the department quite often. Hardy, of course, had passed away much earlier. Hardy had passed away in 1947, so he had never seen Hardy. But he has remembrances of Littlewood, and I felt that I must be one of the very few fortunate people who has met somebody who has met Littlewood. And so I made a note of it, but I did not record it, so it's all in my head. My supervisor is alive, and I still have the chance of going and recording the stuff, his remembrances about Littlewood and about Davenport. So very famous lineage. My supervisor himself was an American and not a British. He chose to come back after his Ph.D. He finished his Ph.D. when he was 26, and he was the last student of Davenport. Davenport had some outstanding students. Two of them went on to win the Fields Medal, which is the highest award for mathematics. And one of them was, I would say, unfortunate not to get it. Probably my most favorite mathematicians till he was alive, now he's no more, called John Conway at Princeton. John Conway sadly passed away due to COVID last year. And I missed my chance of meeting him. I had gone to Princeton to meet Conway in 2017, the last time I visited the US. I have a close friend, my senior from St. Stephen's, who is a professor of mathematics and a professor of economics at Rutgers University. He was formerly at Princeton's maths department, the best ranked maths department in the world. And he continues to reside there. And he, in fact, one of the stories, this is a little bit of an aside, that went round, he had come visiting us about 2015 or something to give a lecture in economics, because he's as much of a game theorist as he is an algebraist. He works in two fields and he's internationally known in both. He did two PhDs, one in economics, one in mathematics from Yale in 6 years. He's an outstanding mind, and then went to the Institute for Advanced Studies, which is founded by Einstein amongst others. He was a fellow there, and then he joined Princeton's maths department. So anyway, so the tale going around when he visited us was that John Nash had become famous because of this book by Sylvia Wasser, which was made into a movie called A Beautiful Mind.
Yes.
And John Nash had conquered schizophrenia, which very few people do. And that is the reason why perhaps the movie was named, or was made. Anyway, so the story that went round in our circles amongst friends was, सिद्धार्थ के घर में तो जॉन नैश आते रहते हैं चाय पीने. So I asked Siddharth, his name is Siddharth Sahi. I asked Siddharth, भाई लोग ने ये अफवाह फैलाई है कि आपके घर में जॉन नैश आते रहते हैं. I know John Nash is is a Princeton mathematician. So he says, yes, इसमें कोई बड़ी बात नहीं है. John Nash is a friend of mine. We work in the same area. And for many years, we were both mathematicians in the same department at Princeton University. So he's a colleague of mine. तो आप अगर अपने कोलीग को चाय के लिए बुलाते हैं तो आएंगे ही. और दूसरी बात ये है कि वो तो मेरे एरिया में काम करते हैं. So we exchange notes and we exchange views and so on. So this is not a big thing that John Nash comes to my house. It is blown out of proportion. It's just a friend calling a friend. It may look big, but it is not. Of course, it is partly humility on his part. Princeton has some of the most well-known mathematical minds, like Manjul Bhargav and so many others. Anyway, again, I'm digressing. So I spent my years in Buffalo, at the State University of New York, doing PhD in number theory. After finishing my PhD, I taught for a few years, 2 years at a small college in West Virginia, where I felt that there was no real future for me in terms of academic growth. It was teaching, but no research. And I was also interested in coming back to India. And I applied, and I was fortunate to get 4 job opportunities. And the one I chose was IIT Delhi. I got it quite by chance. In those days, things were not so competitive, perhaps. And the director at IIT Delhi in those days, who happened to be the deputy director when I was a student at IIT Kanpur, Professor Naveen Chandra Nigam. He had come to the US to recruit uh, some PhDs from the US who would like to come back to India, to IIT Delhi specifically. And I happened to be in that drive, and I happened to apply at the right time. And so there was no interview as such, and I just had to push my curriculum vitae and some letters of recommendation. And on the basis of that, I was selected to join the Department of Mathematics at IIT Delhi. I was little less than 30, and the next youngest person in the department is 40 plus. So there's a little bit of a gap between me and the other faculty members. There was no hiring in those days for several years in IIT Delhi. So that made me very young. And it was a learning experience to come back to India after so many years abroad. I had the good fortune of teaching in the US. I knew the other side as well. There were a lot of adjustments to make. I won't go there. So it has been 30 years now. And I have been for several years now the senior most member of the math faculty at IIT Delhi. We have changed our face, I would say, in terms of hiring, in terms of where our department is progressing. The younger faculty are extremely talented, very gifted, and very hardworking. And I'm sure we will do better than we did. Our rankings are going up, if that's a measure of anything whatsoever. And I will say in passing that my interests, I have been writing in Quora from about October of or September of 2016. Before that, I would quietly read what other people wrote, and I would not come on. And I still remember the first answer I gave on Quora, because that is how many of you know me. I say a little bit about it. Was this former student of mine that I mentored. I knew him very well, and I think I had a great role to send him abroad, because he did his 1 year at IIT Delhi, and he was not satisfied with what he was getting out of it. And I said, there is no reason for you to stay here for another 3 years. And if you are interested, I can write you a recommendation, and maybe you can go to MIT or Harvard or Stanford or whatever you want. So he took me up on that offer, and at the end of 2 years, that next year I spent visiting the US. My wife happens to be a professor of mathematics in some university in the US. So I was visiting my wife. This is many years back. And so I also happened to visit MIT's maths department, and I kind of tried to put in a word for the student of mine who was very promising and very diligent. He just finished 1 year. His name was Raghu Mahajan. He did fairly well. In fact, he was an outstanding student, and he did very well in my class. He was head and shoulders over everybody else, and my class only had that particular batch had only the computer science students. This is mathematics specially designed for computer science students, and I had 4 people who were ranked in the top 10 in IIT including JE1, which is Raghu Mahajan. And probably the lowest ranked person was less than 200. There were 60 people in the class. So they're all very good in terms of having done very well in this one exam. But of course, I always mention that this is not the only way to measure things. And how well you do in one exam cannot be taken as a yardstick to measure your success. It cannot and should not. And people sometimes forget that. They pay too much emphasis on one exam. You can have a bad day and not do so well, or you can be lucky and do very well. So you have to be balanced in both ways. And you have to take the good and the bad, and you have to keep persevering to do well. Raghu did that. I found Raghu to be outstanding. I would spend hours with him day after day after day, counseling him and mentoring him. And I'm very happy that he took me up on my advice, and he went abroad after 2 years. And we were in regular touch for several years. Now we are not so much in touch. There's the occasional chat on Google, but otherwise we're not in touch as much. And but I get to hear about him. So that is how I started writing on Quora. Somebody wrote something about Raghu Mahajan, and I said what is written is not quite right, or it is quite right. Just a one-liner and nothing more than that. Subsequently, I started writing simple things on Quora. I still write very simple mathematics on Quora. Unlike my friend who's an extremely competent mathematician, an extremely good writer called Alon Amit. He is a Israeli who works out of California. He's a fantastic writer. He's one of the arguably the best writer on Quora, and I've learned a lot from reading what he writes, and also on conversing with him. We have a chat off and on on forums like this. I've never met him personally. Very gifted and very unassuming mathematician. So I started writing in a sense on Quora very different from what I was told. I was told again and again to write, expand on what I wrote, give detailed answers. I chose not to do that at all. I chose that is not my style. I prefer to keep it short and brief. I like to, if given a question to answer it very briefly. And I feel that if a student hasn't understood it, he has the choice of asking me if some point is not clear, and I can expand on it. But instead of making it very verbose, I will use the opposite line. So I must be one of the very few writers who do it that way. Alon writes in exactly the opposite sense. And I appreciate him for that, because it gives the student a viewpoint as to how a mind is thinking. I don't give that viewpoint because it's very short and crisp. You don't know what is happening in my mind when I give an answer. It's the best answer one can give. But it hides behind, like textbooks do, all the failed attempts at finding that best answer. It is not necessarily the best for the student in a sense. Textbooks are written in exactly that manner. They don't tell you the failures of how you achieved that goal. And that is sometimes not as illuminating. I recognize that, but I think there is only one Alon Amit, and I'll leave it there. The other two things that I did talk about, and I'll talk for 2 minutes on it, nothing more than that. One is my love for sports. I have played some sports to some level. I have played some cricket. I represented my university in the US. For whatever it's worth, the standards are not very high. And I played some cricket for IIT Delhi after I came back for about 6 or 7 years. And then I found that my skills were found wanting. I was hitting 40 20 years back. And I found it difficult to cope playing cricket because the teams would have people who were considerably younger than me, 25-year-olds and so on. And I found that I was not able to cope. So I stopped playing cricket. I played table tennis at the same time because I picked up table tennis in the US. I played good table tennis. I had a ranking which put me as the number 2 in my state. But that was more because the level of that state was not very high rather than my personal skills. When you say that you are first in any field, it only means that you are doing better than the others. It does not mean that it is not an absolute mark. It is a relative standing. So in the same sense, I was the second-ranked player, second-rated player in the US Table Tennis Federation rating. So, I played professional tournaments. And I found that I was the second highest rated player in that particular state. But the state I initially came from, New York, had a much higher level. I was nowhere there. I was maybe the top 10 professional in my city and nowhere in the state. So I was not a very competent player, but I played some table tennis and won some tournaments, some trophies and so on. And I came back to IIT Delhi, and since 1991, for the last 30 years, I've been the captain of the IIT Delhi table tennis team. I still play table tennis, but I'm a little old now, and I find that competing with people less than half my age is a little bit challenging. But I still manage to hold my own. I still compete fairly well. I could say that to my credit that I have captained my team to a silver or a gold every single inter-IIT. In the 14 or so inter-IITs I have played. There are 23 IITs now, so inter-IIT is a very challenging sports competition. And because it is open to staff and not just faculty members, there are 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds playing. And so I take great pride in saying that I've captained my team to only golds and silvers. I think one time we got a bronze. We finished third, but otherwise only golds and silvers. And it's becoming harder and harder for me to stay in the team. The younger people, who are 25 years younger than me, 30 years younger than me, half my age. So I find it a little hard now to keep pace with them. My desire is there, maybe, but my body is not responding as much. The other thing that I have a passion for, with no skill, is listening to music. I'm a very avid fan of old Hindi film songs, and I have done my little bit towards organizing programs year after year in the US in the memory of Muhammad Rafi, who's my idol. I'm a great fan of Muhammad Rafi, as are so many people of my generation. So that is my music, but I only listen. I cannot sing whatsoever. So I'll close there. I know this can be edited and it will be edited. So you have a bigger set of things to edit from. So Dr. Dongre, you can now ask whatever questions you have. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability and try to keep them short.
Thank you very much, sir. It was such an illustrious introduction, and I would be happy if this part could be a separate episode. Basically, we have illustrious that personality, a man from
that is possible.
Yes, a man from rural background to go to Delhi and associating with so many sport personalities and politicians, that to scientists from abroad, the passing out on the college from where Dr. Hardy passed out. He has association with Dr. Ramanujam, and fantastic. Means we are so happy to be part of our interview today. Not only that, you are also a sportman up to a very big level, and again a music lover. And I was watching, sir, your Quora profile, and I found you have answered so many questions, around 3.8 K answers. Is very big answer profile, and plus 48,000 or more followers on Quora. It is like having more than 1 million followers on YouTube also, or Facebook also. It's a very big thing to have such fan following on this Quora platform, which is a scientific platform. And again, you are in the say number theory. It is said that mathematics is the queen of sciences, and number theory is the queen of mathematics. So, and you are the authority in the number system. I think Ramanujan also was in the number system, number theory, and the string theory.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, yes. I am basically personally so fascinated to be a part of this interview, to interact with you. Thank you so much for being with us. So now let's begin with some questions which are sent by our students who are thinking of this Olympiad and all. So, sir, my first question goes to you like this. What is maths for you?
Well, that's a very philosophical question. What do I say? Perhaps I was 12 years old when I decided that this is what I want to do in my life. What was I doing at that age? Well, I guess I was aware of, I had done some geometry. Geometry was introduced maybe in class 6, if I remember correctly. Arithmetic maybe a year before that, or maybe in class 6 as well. And then there was algebra, which I think came in class 7. That period was very good for me because I had access to some of the best books. I don't know if they're the best teachers, but they're the best books. These are books that I wish this generation followed, and I don't know if they still exist. They were written in the 1890s by English mathematicians, and they were followed by my mother and my grandfather, and perhaps even by my mother's grandfather, all of whom did some level of mathematics. My mother's grandfather, granduncle, was a professor of mathematics in Lahore in the early part of the 1900s, 1890s to 1910. And he wrote a book on calculus, which I managed to get a copy of. It is torn and it's not in full, but there is some part of it that still remains. Then there was an institute, a coaching institute that was named after him in Delhi. It is called the S.N. Dasgupta College of Coaching. It was named after him, S.N. Dasgupta, my mother's grandfather, was a professor of mathematics at Women Christian College, which still exists in Lahore. It's a very old college. So these were books written by English mathematicians at that time. There was Hall and Knight for algebra, Hall and Stevens for geometry, nothing for arithmetic. The arithmetic book that I followed, I don't remember. They did not make much of an impression on me. My mother gave me a lot of encouragement to do mathematics. She was very keen to do mathematics. And the only reason she did not was because her father had a failed career as a mathematician. He did a master's in mathematics. We are talking about 1915 or something. In those days, doing a master's was not like what it is now. It was a big deal to do a master's. So my grandfather, who I've never seen, my mother's father, did a master's in mathematics. He was an MA in mathematics, but that was not enough to get you a job. So he joined in a clerical position in the Indian Railways. And this is a different story. I will get there somewhere else. But this is a digression for 2 minutes. My mother tells me that when she was very young, very, very young, she remembers her parents asking a colleague of my grandfather to come and sing because he has a talent at singing. He was an amateur singer, and he was a junior of quite a bit junior to my grandfather, 7 or 8 years junior. He had also been affected by partition, and he had come from, I think, Lahore, also to Delhi. Sorry, this partition was not around the corner. I'm sorry. He had come to Delhi for, I don't exactly know now what made him come to Delhi, but he was not a Delhi wala per se. He was from Punjab or Lahore. Anyway, Lahore was a part of Punjab then. And my grandmother used to say that he was such a fantastic singer that he would come very often, and he was very happy being heard. Soon after that, he found a calling. He moved away to Calcutta and then to Bombay and became the biggest face in Hindi film music. His name was Kundan Lal Sehgal. And of course, people this generation would not know what that is. But K.L. Sehgal was the only singer that existed, and he ruled the domain of Hindi film music. Not playback in those days, because in those days there was no playback singing by and large. You sang your own songs. So when Kundan Lal Sehgal died at 42, he was the Shahenshah of Hindi film music. So this is K.L. Sehgal. Anyway, I was digressing. What is maths for me? Well, maths is life for me. There's nothing else that I really have known. People sometimes ask, what would you have done if you had not done this? That thought didn't occur to me. If somebody asked me that, I have no clue how I would answer that. Because at about 11 or 12, I decided I want to do mathematics. What with it, I didn't know. I was about 12, going on 13, when I learned trigonometry from S.L. Loni's book. And my mother, who was not in touch with mathematics, would help me with it. I was misdiagnosed and very ill, and kind of not in good shape, hospitalized and all of that. And my mother would, reel off questions from Loni, identities. That's how Loni begins, really. And say, can you do this? And I learned the art of trying to do things in my head, because I could not sit up. And my mother was exceedingly competent. I always wonder how a 40-year-old woman who had lost touch with trigonometry was able to do that. It's more credit to her than to me, and that she was able to do those things. So my mother said, well, this is the second last hurdle, and there's something called calculus. Calculus is much, much harder, and she had never done calculus. Calculus did not exist at her time. She finished her high school in 1948, the year after independence, and joined Hindu college. And I said, well, let's see what calculus is like. And the next year we had calculus. So I was about 13 or going on 14 when calculus was introduced. Of course, the calculus we did is pittance in comparison to what we do now. The syllabus much, 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 much wider. We did hardly any calculus. Just a little bit was in the syllabus. We had 7 textbooks in our course that we had to cover in 3 years syllabus, and 1 thin book was on calculus. it was an apology for calculus. I mean, if somebody says I did calculus, I would, if I say did calculus, I would laugh. But okay, so I did some definitions of limits and continuity and so on, and some application. But the book was not very well written, and I suspect that my teacher didn't know it too well either. It was fairly new in those days. We are talking about 45 years back. That was the last straw. When my mother saw that I was competent enough to understand calculus, then my mother did not prevent me from following my passion for mathematics. My other relatives did try to make an engineer out of me, take the IIT entrance exam. With your marks, perhaps you could get into BITS Pilani and so on and so forth and do engineering. But I resisted that urge. And I happened to get into a very good college, so that helped. And I happened to do very well in my first year. I did, in fact, very, very well. So that basically told them that, well, maybe this is what he should be doing. And I never regretted it. So what is maths for me? Well, there is nothing else in life for me. I still do a lot of mathematics. There are days where I spend 5-6 hours doing research mathematics. Writing on code, of course, is more service to others than anything else. Now I'm slowing down as I hit 60. I don't have that many PhD students left. But I work a lot with undergraduates. And I have, maybe about 30 odd publications with undergraduates from IIT Delhi in fairly well-known research journals, international research journals. This is just with undergraduates from IIT Delhi who are exceedingly competent and exceedingly sharp. And there are people who have published 5 papers with undergraduates from IIT Delhi. So one of my significant contributions, I would say, is actually to promote research amongst the undergraduates, those who are interested in the kind of mathematics I do, which is number theory and graph theory later, and now Ramsey theory, which is a part of combinatorics. So yeah, so that is how I'd like to answer that question. It's very philosophical, and I've taken that philosophy out and simply answered it as directly as I could with my usual digressions.
Thank you, sir. And we know that viewers, Dr. Tripathi have published more than 75 papers in the international journals. Sir, I think you had the genes taken from your grandfather and your mother for mathematics and music, right?
Yes, certainly I could say that. Absolutely.
And even that you are pairing with Raghu Mahajan, I think it is a pairing like Hardy and Ramanujam. That way you have worked for the years.
We were not collaborators. I did ask Raghu to do some problems with me, but we never managed to bring that to fruition. We never published together. He did get interested in what I was telling him in graph theory.
Right.
He was in first year, but he was very sharp. So I'm very sure if we had worked harder, we might have got a publication. But I only taught him for 1 semester. The next year I was not there. I went to the US and he was doing his second year in IIT Delhi. And when I came back, he was preparing to leave to MIT. So I didn't have that much interaction after that. So yes, your question is it worth?
Yeah. Sir,
is it worth preparing?
Before that, I will ask. Means basically in India we have got a great history of Olympiad. Many people have won various medals in Olympiad. So specifically about mathematics. So is it worth to prepare for the math Olympiad?
Well, I have a slightly different viewpoint. I also have a slightly different viewpoint from the Prime Minister and the President, who say that we did very well in the Olympics. It depends on your yardsticks, really. We got 7 medals. I'm giving an analogy, that is why I bring this up, not just because I'm a sports fan. We won 7 medals this time, which is one more than we won in London in 2012, and several more than we did in 2016 Rio. But really, you have to look at where we should have been, given the encouragement that we give to our athletes. So a classmate of mine is a member of TOPS, the organization that doles out money to the Indian sportsmen. He is the General Secretary of All India Football Federation. And he's been involved in uplifting football for the last 10 years in India. So I talk to him all the time about sports. And he told me that TOPS, this body, was expecting 20 plus medals. And 15 plus with 100% certainty. So if you look at that, look at things from that perspective, we only got 7. And several of our players who were ranked number 1 were eliminated from competition even in the first round. This includes a boxer and a wrestler, whose names I know, but there's no point in taking it. Deepika Kumari did slightly better, got to the quarterfinals and lost out and so on. But these were our certain medal hopes. Neeraj was also a medal hope. We were hoping that he would finish in the top 4. Perhaps if he got lucky, he would get a bronze, but of course he exceeded expectations. The Olympiads is something which is fairly new to us. The Olympiad started with 6 or 7 countries in 1959. India was not amongst them. It came to India in 1989 through the good offices of some 2 or 3 people, and luckily I know all of them very well. I myself got involved in Olympiads quite by chance. In 1994, I attended a conference, a workshop on trying to understand the then recent proof of Fermat's last theorem by Andrew Wiles. So some very prominent mathematicians had come to deliver a week-long conference in trying to understand Fermat's last theorem. This is 1994, I believe, and Wiles' proof had not yet been accepted. So I was one of the 30 persons, participants who was invited for that, to attend that. And the organizers later told me, this is organized by Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. They told me that they had scope for only one member who was from a fairly prominent place, because they felt that there was enough occasion for them to learn stuff anyway. So they were trying to promote people who were teaching in some small colleges and so on, who did not have the infrastructure to learn these things. I was in IIT Delhi, and so I was already in a privileged place, and they were not trying to get too many participants from prominent places. So they had scope for only one, or seat for only one such person. And the reason they picked me was because they looked at my portfolio, and they felt that they could put me into the Olympiad program, and I would be the right person given the research I do. I do elementary number theory and very simple stuff which involves high school mathematics. I don't do very difficult mathematics. I do very simple mathematics. So it makes it easy to read. So they thought that they could involve me in the Olympiad program, and they said this is the main reason why we selected you over many others. It is not because of your other credentials. So I said thank you, and I got friendly with them. And they were the ones who ran the Olympiad program. Very good friends of mine now. It's been an association of many, many years, closing around 30 years now. Pranesh Achar, C.R. Pranesh Achar, and B.J. Venkatachala. Shailesh Shirali was also there. So Shailesh incidentally did physics at St. Stephen's, and then did a Ph.D. in mathematics from Texas, and then came back to India, and for many years was the headmaster of Rishi Valley, which is a Jiddu Krishnamurti school in Andhra Pradesh, very prominent boarding school. Shailesh is a very competent problem solver and very interested in problem solving. A very good mind. These are 3 of the best minds for problem solving that India had. Now, of course, they're too old and none of them really contribute. So I got into the Olympiad program thanks to Pranesh Achar and Venkatachala. And India hosted the Olympiads, the only time it did, in 1995. And it was supposed to be held in the Gyan Bhavan in Delhi. And because as a Delhi person, I was going to play a very prominent part in it, being in the local organization committee. But you know how it is in Vigyan Bhavan. At the last minute, the government, the bureaucracy decided that those particular dates could not be given to us for this international event. And hosting the International Mathematics Olympiad is a big deal. You need a lot of infrastructure and space and so on. And in those days, in 1995, I suspect something like 70 to 80 teams would participate, countries would participate. Now that number is more like 110. So it is a big, big challenge. And, there's always questions of security that hits you in the capital. So that is also an issue. And the organizers, meaning the Indian organizers, decided to move it out from Delhi to Mumbai. And well, it was held at a time when I was not able to take leave. So I was sadly not a part of that team of organizing. But I got headlong into being invited for the camp, what we used to call the IMO training camp. And the first one I attended was in 1997. I was not able to go to, I was invited before that from 95 onwards. But for one reason or the other, I was not able to go and attend the camp. 97 was the first camp I attended, and then I attended a few more infrequently. The last one was 2005. And after that, I have not ever attended the IMO training camp. I didn't have the time to spend 4 weeks there. So I would typically go for 1 week or 2 weeks at most, and then come back. Is it worth preparing? Well, I would simply say, before I come to that, so the reason I got into all of this is our performance in the Olympiads has not been good. I am not going to mince words and say that we've been doing very well. We have not been doing well in the Olympiads, in the Olympic Games. We did not have a good Olympic Games by all standards. We have not been doing well in the mathematics Olympiad. You can count on your fingertips the number of people who got a gold, for example. And for an activity at which we are supposedly good at, mathematics and problem solving, we should have done much better. There are smaller countries with much less infrastructure that do a much better job. I don't want to talk about why we are not doing better. I will simply say that we are not doing well. And so a few years back, maybe a decade back, there was a Korean private television agency that came and interviewed me and asked me ironically why India is doing so well. And it was ironical because my opinion was that we were not doing well. And yet I had to speak for the motion. And I dug up the records of the Koreans. And the Koreans had been finishing in the top 10 for a decade at least, from 2005 to 2015. And I started wondering as to why this country that is always in the top 10 is interviewing some random person in a country that is not doing well. It is almost like mocking at our inability, simply saying that you come from the land of Ramanujan. Well, that's all in the past. At present, as far as Olympiad is concerned, I'm not talking about mathematics research. We have not been doing well. Why is it? That brings me straight to this question. Is it worth preparing? You see, the set of people who prepare for the Olympiads is really not necessarily the set of best minds that we have. What do I think about the best minds? Where do they go to? I feel from my experience of being attached to high school students for so many years, as a RMO coordinator for 16 years in Delhi and giving so many lectures in schools and so on, is that our best minds, mathematics-wise, tend to appear for the IIT JEE. The JEE is a very different exam from the Olympiads. They have different strengths and different preparations. You can't compare the two exams. And it's almost impossible to prepare for both together. So you almost have to put all the eggs in one basket. If you're preparing for the IIT JEE and that is what your focus is, then that is what your focus is. It is the exceptional person who's very, very bright and very interested who appears for the Olympiads. So what is it that is worth it? Well, of course, the first of the answers would be that it's a challenge of doing it. I mean, we mathematicians who do mathematics for career do it not because of some rewards you're going to get, but because we're interested in doing it, because of the challenge of it. It's like saying there's a Mount Everest in front of you, and the challenge isn't climbing it. It's not because you're going to get a reward after it. So the worth or the worthiness should come simply because of the interest in problem solving, which is a part of mathematics. In high school, that is pretty much all there is to mathematics. But to sweeten the flavor, what we have done is to NBHM, the National Board for Higher Mathematics, is that if you do very well in the Olympiads, say finish in the top 75 and get a special certificate, or go to the camp, which is for the top 30 people, now maybe 35, is you get direct admission to some of the best places to study mathematics, which would have to be ISIs, the ISI Bangalore, the Chennai Mathematical Institute, and in the recent and ISC Bangalore as well. And in the recent past, in the last 3 years, IIT Bombay has started a math program, a BMath. And IIT Delhi is starting this program for 2022. We are offering a BMath, a Bachelor's in Mathematics. And we are hoping that we can pick some of these bright young minds who are interested in doing mathematics in coming to our institute and learning some mathematics from us. We don't have a direct admission. So by doing the Olympiads, it's not as if, and doing well in it, it's not going to give you direct admission, but it will qualify you to get admission in some of these places, some directly, some indirectly. So if you put it together with the KVPY, these are the two big exams, I would say, that set you off on a career path in mathematics. And if you are not good enough or not that prepared to do well in this, well, then there are so many other universities. Maybe some of the questions will address that, so I won't address that just now. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So this group, basically MathFix, is basically the group of the persons who are mathematically interested students and they want to prepare for the Olympiads. So one of the students have asked a question that I am currently in the class 11th and preparing for JEE, KVPY as well as Math Olympiad. So how should I manage my time? Because these three are all together going at the same time and both are very important. So the time management issue is there. So can you guide on that?
Well, it's impossible to do all three with the same degree. So I would simply say that you put an order in your reference set. For example, in the order in which it is written, let's say, is the order in which your interest lies. JEE is 1, KVPY is 2, Olympiad is 3. Then, well, it is important to get one of the three. And if you do 40, 30, 30, that is not the way to do it. Put most of your eggs in the JEE basket because that is where it is. Then a little bit in the KVPY, whatever little remains in the Math Olympiad. I don't have a percentage to it. It really depends on you. But in my experience, I was not an outstanding student. So if I was to take these exams at my time now, I'm almost certain I would not go into any of these things. I would not get into any of them. I was not good enough to do well in any of the three things. Certainly not the first two. Possibly Math Olympiad, I may have had skills to do some level of competence. These are very competitive exams and times are very challenging. So if you're interested in all three, I really think you should focus on one, otherwise you stand the danger of getting into none of them. These are separate exams. Maybe there are questions on this that come up later. JEE requires a certain kind of preparation. The best I can say is that there are some coaching classes for JEE, many that exist all over the country. Their bread and butter is to coach you for IIT JEE. They know how to prepare you for this exam much better than I do, because that is what their livelihood is. Besides which, being on the other side of the fence, being an IIT mathematics faculty, you might well appreciate that there will be occasions, and there have been occasions, where I'm actually involved in setting the JEE paper. I cannot reveal when and how many times it has happened, but it has happened, and it happens to all IIT faculty, science faculty, that we set the JEE paper. Now, it is not possible, therefore, for me to say anything more about issues about the paper or anything about JEE. It's a top secret sort of a thing. And I've set the paper in the recent past also. I know what the exam is like, but I can only say that if you want to prepare for the JEE, your best bet is to go to the people who are most competent in teaching you. I'm not going to tell you names because it may be viewed as somebody endorsing somebody. I don't want to do that. Of course, I have in mind certain better coaching classes than others, but in a public platform, I'm not going to share that information. I will only say that the government has taken an initiative, that I can say, called IIT PAV. And if you Google for it, you will find that this government has, under the stewardship of the Prime Minister, said that to the extent possible, even people who come from rural India and from small places should have access to good learning. And some IIT faculty in all sciences have put together a series of lectures that covers all topics that come in IIT JEE. And that those lectures are in the public platform. And they are under the guise of, they are called IIT PAL, P-A-L, PAL for friend. And you can download them and you can view them whenever you want. Now, as to the level of competence of those lectures, etc., I do not really know. I can only say it exists, and so there is something more that is in the public domain and that is free to everybody. KVPY is a fairly recent phenomenon. I have been involved with KVPY also since its inception, since its very first year. For about 20 years, I've done the KVPY interviews, and I've set the KVPY papers also a couple of times. It's set by ISD Bangalore, and I think it's a very challenging exam. Again, there are fewer places that train you for it, but since I'm not really in the base of KVPY, I'm not a KVPY faculty per se, I'm not a member of IIT Bangalore, I can simply say your best bet is to, again, join a coaching class, one, to pick up some standard books which have some papers, past papers. KVPY is an exam which is objective type. And to the best of my knowledge, things may have changed, about 8 to 10% of the students are picked up to take the final round, are selected for the interviews at the different levels. Now, at the interview level, I think there are up to 1,000 scholarships given for all three levels. The interview, of course, you can't really prepare for. It really is luck of the draw. I've sat in interview boards where the standards may have been very high or very low because it depends on who the set of people are. So you can never really prepare for the KVPY interview. Perhaps you can ask some of your seniors what the interview was like, or if you're fortunate to meet somebody who does the KVPY interviews and is willing to tell you what kind of questions are there, then you will gain a lot from it. But remember, you only get there after you've qualified the Math Olympiad is probably the easiest to train from the three because there's a lot of literature on Google on Math Olympiad, a lot of it, from other countries as well. So this is probably the easiest to train from in terms of simply the literature, the infrastructure that exists. Mathematics Olympiad is a problem-solving exam. At the end of the day, if you pick up a book, you look at a problem, you look at the solution and work it out, that is the wrong way of doing it. You don't learn mathematics by looking at the solution. You learn mathematics by solving the problem yourself, trying it for some time, but not being pig-headed about it, looking at a problem and thinking about it for days together, because you have shortage of time. There's only that much of time you have. So pick it up, pick up a problem, think about it for a while, maybe half an hour, 1 hour. And then if you have access to the solution, look up the solution. And make sure you understand what the solution is like so that you can apply it the next time you see a problem like that. So to answer his question, in one last sentence, pick up the order of preference for you. You cannot, it is not feasible for you unless you're a Raghu Mahajan to do all three things together. It is not feasible. So for ordinary mortals like you and me, decide what is the most important thing and go for that. You would be lucky if you get any one of the three. Remember, it's a very small percentage of people who get even one of the three. And I am very sure that if I was born in this generation, I would not be able to get the first two. Maybe with luck, the third one. This is not for average people.
Yes.
But that does not mean you don't try. You have to try. You have to try your hardest. All right. So I think that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you, sir. Generally, the students try to have the boards in all the three places and then they jumble here and there.
Yes, there's the board as well. There's the board as well. So there's one more thing that you have to add to that. In my time, we were not confused because there's only the board.
Right.
Well, there was the JE, but the JE was not so important for us.
Yes. Sir, the next question was that I want to pursue math as a career, but I am confused if I will be able to do it. I am unable to understand if it is really a passion or a mere liking. So please help me out.
Well, this is very difficult to answer because it depends on the person. And the person is written behind the question. I don't know who that person is. In particular, I don't know how old he is, at what level he is, what are the options he has, so many things. So it is very, very hard to answer this question, but I have to answer this question, therefore, keeping in mind certain basics which may be wrong. Let me assume that this person is somebody in high school and not somebody who's 30 years old or 25 years old. Maybe that's a reasonable assumption to make. Let me also assume that he's probably in class 11 or 12 and a career decision has to be made soon. So with those two assumptions, I will simply say that one, how good is your mathematics? Now you have to probably not ask yourself that question, but also get an independent judgment from people who understand mathematics better than you do. For example, your seniors, could be your parents, could be your math teachers, who can give an independent observation and an unbiased observation of your ability. That is one, because that is important. It's very hard to figure out how good you are by yourself. For example, I might think I'm very good, but the others may not think so. And what is more important in life perhaps is what the others think of your ability, not your own. Passion, I think, is exceedingly important. So when I decided to follow number theory, I wanted to do mathematics, of course, at a very young age. I read an article by K.G. Ramanathan, who is then the Dean of the School of Mathematics, I think, at Tata Institute, on a very popular student magazine. I forget the name. I think it was called Science Today, on Srinivasa Ramanujan, The Life and Times. I was 15 years old, and I was completely intrigued by what Ramanujan did. And I decided that whatever he did is what I want to do. Unfortunately, I don't do that kind of mathematics. I do number theory, but not the number theory that Ramanujan did. The number theory is very broad. So, but I must say that my calling to do number theory came from Ramanujan, and I followed it with a passion that I want to do number theory. Passion is very, very important, and a lot more important than ability. Even if you're not very able, in any case, who decides if you're able or not able? Different people have different versions of what is able. Competence has its different versions. My school of thought comes from my guru, G.H. Hardy, who wrote this wonderful book just before a little bit before he passed away, 10 years before he passed away, when he was about 60. It is called A Mathematician's Apology, and I would recommend this to any young mind to read. And I am drawn very much to his philosophy. And his philosophy essentially is several things, but one sentence is my quote out of context, is that most of us are good at nothing. I strongly believe that. It depends on what you call good. It depends on what your definition of average is. One of my colleagues, who is also a former student of mine at IIT Delhi, he's now a professor of computer science at IIT Delhi. My namesake, his name is Amitabha Tripathi. He is a best-selling author. He and Chetan Bhagat, who was a year senior to him in the same hostel, Shivalik, they were both my students, are bestseller authors. Chetan Bhagat is probably a lot more famous because he only does writing.
Yes.
Amitabh Bakshi does writing as a secondary vocation. He is first and foremost a professor of computer science at IIT Delhi. So Bagshi's book is called Above Average. So he qualifies himself by thinking and pretending that he's above average. I'm sure he thinks he's above average and that's it. Now, for most of the people, he's not just above average. He's a JE rank of 77, which is very high for most people because normal people don't even crack the IIT JE. He went to one of the best schools in Delhi called Delhi Public School at RK. I've known him from school actually. And then when he became an undergrad, and now he's a fellow table tennis player in my table tennis team. So his standards of what is average or just above average is perhaps slightly different from yours and mine. So you take this with a pinch of salt. When I say that 99.99% of the people are good at nothing. So don't take that very literally. If you have a passion for doing it, then that is a very, very important criteria for following it. So whoever this person is, I would say, one, ask your peers how good you are. If they say you are better than average, let's say, and you have a passion for doing it, then I would say it is not a bad idea to pursue mathematics as a career. Because remember, a mathematics as a career starts with doing a bachelor. And I'm very fond of saying, because I give a lot of lectures to school students about career options. For whatever reason, I'm not particularly qualified, but some people think that I know that very well. This is not correct. But anyway, I pretend that I know something about it, and I give a lot of free advice. So one of the reasons I advocate doing a career in mathematics or a BSc in mathematics is if you find that BSc in mathematics is not your liking, and this is quite possible because of the quantum leap between high school mathematics and college mathematics. It's a big, big jump. There's a lot of abstractness that comes into mathematics at the college level. It comes into the first year when we teach calculus, because we teach the same limits and continuity, but we use a lot of abstract concepts. We use this symbol called epsilon and delta, and confuses the hell out of the undergraduate students. Fortunately for me, when I first encountered it, there was no confusion. It came very easily for me. But it's like saying, it's luck of the draw. You get vaccinated, you might get a very high fever, and you may not get a very high fever. I happen to be one of those who did get very high fever. I got no fever. Epsilons and deltas came very naturally to me. But I know very competent mathematicians who struggled to understand that concept. So take it with a pinch of salt, ride with the wave. If you like it, continue doing it. But remember, the moment you go from bachelor's to master's in mathematics, your options are kind of getting closed out. You're kind of going towards the career and teaching and research of mathematics. You're closing yourself out. But if you don't like mathematics so much at the bachelor's level, you can still pursue so many other options where you have an edge, because you've had this critical analytical thinking that mathematics as an undergrad gives you. To name a few, MCA, data mining, big data research is big these days. You always have an MBA option. An entrance to a big MBA exam like the CAT. A part of it is being able to solve questions, very simple questions, but very quickly. So you have many, many career options at the end of a bachelor's degree in mathematics and also economics. These are two of the best things you can do if you're confused. Nobody says you have to keep doing mathematics after that. And it is wrong to say that engineering, just because you're good in mathematics, is the place to go to. There is a lot of engineers who actually don't have a job at the end of a bachelor's. I know many of my students who have got out of a good engineering college, that IIT Delhi is, don't have a job after graduating. There's a very large percentage of undergraduates in IIT Delhi who don't graduate, who drop out. They're not able to cope. So getting into IIT is difficult, but I think doing well in IIT is much harder. This is something that people don't understand. Because remember, in IIT, you're competing only with those people who have got in. There are no backbenchers. There are no people who are getting 40% marks, and so you've got 41, so you're better than that person. Those people don't exist. Everybody in that class has got 90% or 95%. And you're only competing with them. Only competing with them. So I would say that it is quite challenging to do well in IIT. It is difficult to get into IIT, but I think it is far more difficult to do well in IIT. And as my favorite example to first year students to motivate them to do well in IIT is to tell them that you have probably finished in the top 5% of your class throughout your career. And now I'm facing this class of maybe 200, and 100 of you are going to finish in the bottom 50% of your class. This is a theorem that I can prove to you. At the end of this class, 50% of you will finish in the bottom 50%, and one of you will actually finish last. From finishing first all your life, you're now finishing last. And I can prove to you there'll be one such person at least. Now, you are 17 years old. How do you face that dilemma, that situation, that mental pressure? How do you cope with it? Student counseling is a very important part of all IITs. Very, very important part. And the dropout rate, the attrition rate in IITs is exceedingly hard. And we struggle to motivate our students to stay afloat, to just study despite not doing so well, because doing well relatively is also dependent on how the others do. It is not in your hands. You can only do absolutely well. You cannot do relatively well. So coming first, etc., is relatively well. It's not absolutely well. That is not in your hands. What is in your hands is what you have to do. Do as well as you can. Leave the rest to whoever. If you believe in God, then God or whoever else. Teachers, whatever, it doesn't matter. So I will say to this particular person, follow your heart. If your heart isn't doing mathematics, as my heart was so many years back, I never regretted it. I never regretted going to an IIT to become an engineer. Yes, I went to IIT, but that was to do mathematics and do a master's in it, not to study engineering. I'm not at all an advocate of following the herd mentality. वो engineering पढ़ रहा है तो मुझे भी करना है. And it is completely wrong to say that you will be successful in life in terms of making money or a job as an engineer. It is not correct. I can name many who are not doing well at all. And a large percentage of IIT undergrads do not like where they are. They are there because they're competent and good enough to have cracked the IIT JEE. Raghu Mahajan was JEE 1. The pressure on him was immense. So he did CS. Not because he was interested in computer science. He's now doing physics. He was interested in mathematics and physics. So the moment I heard that, I made my best effort to wean him out of the IIT system. I said, इसमें कुछ नहीं रखा है. तुम सीधे MIT पहुंच जाओ, जहां मैं जाना जाओ और physics करो. क्यों तुम ये इसमें फंसे हुए? And he said, yes, and I will follow your advice. And he has never regretted that. He does physics now. So I will say do that, but also understand your capability. Don't be mad about it. If others say, look, bete, maybe this is not what you should do. People don't say things bluntly. They realize that passion is there, but your competence is not there. वो भी सोचना है. और अगर competence नहीं है, then I will simply say that I'm not talking about the Hardy level of competence. Hardy will say nobody is competent. I'm not saying that. So let me change my definition a little bit. Then I will say do things that your parents will ask you to do, which is, as a parent, I will say that too, which is do something which is more likely to get you a job. Do a safe field. And there is nothing safer than engineering. Nothing safer than engineering. You are more likely than not to get an undergraduate degree from some engineering college and get a job in, say, a TCS or Infosys or something like that, or Accenture that hires a lot of people, pays you some decent amount of money and so on. There's no great career growth in it, and the job may be not very exciting to you, but it's basically a trade-off between passion and interest and safety and money making. And lastly, I will say that as a mathematics professor, I think I'm quite comfortable with the money I make. It is wrong to say that we mathematics teachers, and Dr. Dongre will, I'm sure, agree with that.
Yes.
We are comfortable in our life. We may not be as rich as some of the richest people in the private sector, but we are comfortable in what we're doing. And I, for one, I don't know about Dr. Dongre, have a lot of free time, and
Yes.
I have a lot of free time to do what I desire to do. I'm my own master. I do research as governed by what I'm interested in. Nobody tells me, ye karna hai. There's no fixed targets or projects in mind. I'm a very, very free man.
The peace of mind and the satisfaction is too much.
Too much. And I will
Yes.
say that in a repeated career survey in mathematics, in the US, they asked a bunch of people to rate their level of satisfaction in what they do. The job satisfaction is highest in a person who does research mathematics. Has been over 100 professions in the US for years together, teaching and research of mathematics. There is no higher degree of satisfaction.
Yes. When you are deep in that topic and thinking in that is the meditation that it gives you a lot of satisfaction.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. So the answers given by you are so nice and so philosophical and so experienced. Our viewers would be getting a lot of insights. Not only
Certainly
in
experienced.
the, yes, sort of means they will get that insight regarding the career as well as how to think basically how to look into the career side. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, the next question by one of the students was, how should I prepare for INMO? Should I learn a lot of the concepts or practice a lot of questions or have a combination of both? That was, so
So
what you
I
will say about that?
partly answered a little bit of the
Yeah.
Olympiads.
Yes, sir.
This question could have come right after that.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Short.
INMO now may be slightly different, but at my time, I don't think it's that different. In my time, when I was the coordinator for the Delhi region, uh, I was a coordinator from 2000 to 2016. We had what is called the RMO, the Regional Mathematics Olympiad, and then the INMO. You cannot prepare for the INMO. You are actually invited to appear for the INMO. Now I am told there is a free RMO. At my time, as a Delhi coordinator, I did not do a pre RMO because my region was not big enough. I invited students directly to take the RMO. But now even Delhi region, I'm told, has a pre RMO. So pre RMO is something that anybody can appear for. But by definition, I suppose if you don't do well enough in pre RMO, you cannot be invited for RMO.
Right.
Certainly, if you don't do well enough in RMO, you can't come for INMO. So how should you prepare for INMO? You are jumping the gun. It's like saying, how do I prepare for my PhD? Well, you haven't got a bachelor's degree. So first finish a bachelor's and then let's talk about it.
Right.
So let me just replace that word INMO by the first Olympiad that exists. Maybe that is what you're asking because that is the step towards it. You know, there is pre-RMO, then there is RMO, then there's INMO, and then there's INMO training camp where we do the selection for the Indian team and then you sit for the IMO, which is only 6 people in the country. So how should you prepare for this? I would say pick up, it, in this day and age, you're very fortunate, there's the internet. Google, pick up any source that you can get. There are notes and there are problem solving books galore on the net. You can get them for free. The book that I would recommend the most in terms of theory would be An Excursion in Mathematics, written by my colleagues from the Bhaskaracharya Pratishthan in Pune. That is good because there is a little bit of theory, a reasonable amount of theory, whatever you need to know, a reasonable amount of problems, and from what I recall, even the past papers. The single most important thing for you is to go to the website of NBHM, of HPCSE, Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education in Mumbai, part of DIFR, that conducts these exams. And I'm told that the website has past question papers. When I ran the Olympiads, I had the past question papers on my website also. But now that website is gone because I'm no longer the coordinator. You can get the past papers. They also, and this I don't like, also have solutions to the papers. The wrong way of preparing for it is to also download the solutions. Don't make that mistake. Don't get tempted by it.
Correct.
Take the question, think about it, give it some reasonable thought, and then measure yourself and learn from the solutions that exist. An Excursion in Mathematics is a good book in terms of learning theory. And the other book that I would recommend is by Engels. It's, I think, called Problem Solving Strategies. Engels wrote that book to prepare the German Olympiad team, probably about 20 years back. And slowly and gradually, that book became an international bestseller, and now we can get an Indian reprint of it fairly inexpensively. Both these books are available for something like 250 rupees. So it is usually affordable to people. That book will hold you in good stead all the way till IMO, not just INMO, to go beyond INMO. And as you progress, for example, if you go to INMO, some regions, including Delhi, used to, we do a lot of intensive training for our students if you appear for the INMO. So the thing at my time was the top 30 students made it from RMO to INMO. It became 35 because 5 seats were given to girl students. I don't know what the numbers are now. And then again, 30 went from INMO to the next level, which was the IMO training camp, IMOTC. And then from the training camp, we selected 6 to represent India. As you go higher and higher, you will find that a lot of avenues open up. You meet people who will be willing to give their time and energies and guide you. It is not feasible to guide every person who's appearing for the base exam because you're talking about numbers here. But if I already know that this guy is interested and somewhat competent and has made it to the top 30 in Delhi, the RMO winners, I did this all my 16 years. I trained them for a week of maybe 6 hours of coaching at different venues because I wanted the Delhi boys to do as well as they could. I also trained the GMO winners. In those days, the GMO was the Group Mathematics Olympiad. This is the same exam conducted for the CBSE. So CBSE would call me all the time only because I was a Delhi person. They did not have to pay for traveling allowances, and also because I trained at the IMO training camp. So I did a lot of the GMO training for the boys there. And later they ran out of funds and so on. So the CBSE would write to me and say, can we have our boys sent to your training center because you're training the Delhi RMO winners and not the other winners. I don't have the infrastructure to train everybody who comes to me. And since I don't charge any money for any training, I don't pay them and they don't pay me. You bring your own food, you stay here for 6 hours and learn whatever you want. And my trainers are past winners, those who have been to the IMO camp and who are now students of IIT Delhi.
Yes.
So they give their free time and free energy. They're very happy to do it. I'm the only unqualified trainer, having never been to the Olympiad. So the others are very competent people. So you can forget what this old man is saying, but listen to what these youngsters are saying. They are your gurus. They are very competent people in problem solving. And I am just talking from experience. I'm not necessarily a very competent problem solver. So this is what you should do. You have some resources from the internet and those 2 books, and that is good enough for you. But look at the trends, look at what questions come, and that will give you an idea of what level you should pitch your learning from. And if you happen to be in Pune, then you're very fortunate because there's a Bhaskaracharya Pratishthan that would train you maybe. Or if you're in Calcutta, then the ISI Calcutta people do the training. I don't know what has happened to the Delhi place at all because since I've not been involved in Olympiads for the last 5 years, I've disassociated myself from Olympiads. In fact, on core, I rarely write much on the Olympiads because I don't feel I'm competent to write. Trends change, times change, and I'm not up with the times because I'm not involved in the Olympiads anymore. Yeah.
Right. So in fact, sir, you are the guru of gurus. In Hindi we say Mahaguru. So it is basically that way, and we are very much fortunate to have guidance from you.